All right, all right, all right. Hey, Colin, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic.
What did the Ramones say, buddy?
I was waiting. I was waiting for that
Oh, I
line.
was just tripping you up.
You're tripping me. You're throwing me off.
Oh, a little curveball every once in a while.
Feeling kind of matrixy here. Uh, the Ramones said, "Hey ho, let's go."
Well, hello, our legendary friends. Yes, you're listening to another episode of Legends and
And
Losers.
losers.
And one that we had a lot of fun with, and one that we think you're going to have a lot of fun with. Uh, our theme today, what's our theme today, Colin?
Our theme today is books.
Yeah, books, and in Pacific, Pacifically, we mean the Pacific Ocean, or
Pacifically.
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 Pacifically, we mean business books.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
So we have a theme of business books, and
Yes.
one of
And
the most important people in the business book world is with us today, isn't she?
yes, she is Sally Haldorson.
Yeah, from our great friends at 800 CEO Read. So we'll get to more on Sally in a sec. Um, but the interesting thing to me about books, and I'm dyslexic, so reading is not exactly the easiest thing in the world for me. But when I think about books, they make a huge difference, and that may sound like a ridiculously obvious thing to say, but starting off in business for me at 18, I could learn by doing, I could learn by seeking out mentors and coaches, and I could learn by reading. And there were a handful of books that I read as a young man that if I don't read those books, I don't think we're having this conversation. Did you have any books like that, Colin, that were really impactful for you, particularly from a business and a business context?
Um, well, the Lean Startup, I would say for sure.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, Eric's so smart. I mean, that's a more modern one for sure. But I mean, one of the most important books in business written in the last probably 20 years.
do you recall Crossing the Chasm?
Do I recall Crossing the Chasm? Yeah, I do recall Crossing the Chasm. I didn't read that super early in my career because it came for timeline wise, it came a little
Mhm.
bit later for me. But that's not to diminish its impact. I think Jeff Moore is literally a genius, and I think his contribution to the technology industry and really to business in general, to marketing thinking. He's really evolved over time to be a business strategist. And it all really started with Crossing the Chasm. And yeah, very, very impactful book. If you're in the tech business and you haven't read it, it's a must read. The other thing, too, I don't know if you knew this, Colin, Jeff updates the book on a fairly regular basis with more and more modern examples. So I think he does a good job of keeping it alive in the context of the modern companies that people would, and categories that people would relate to today.
Well, speaking of modern companies, one of the other books that I really liked was Built to Last.
Yeah,
I thought that left a really lasting impact. No pun intended, but it was great. I thought that that was a big learning for me, taking a lot of takeaways out of that book.
well, and Jim Collins, the author, probably the most important business writer of the last 20 years. Hard to argue against for sure. And he's buddies with Kevin Maney.
No way.
Yeah. They, my understanding, and I don't know Jim at all, so I'm just sort of parroting my memory of what Kevin
Mm-hmm.
said, and it's been a couple of scotches, but my memory is they kind of came up together, and I do know they're friends. I do know that Jim has written the foreword to at least one, maybe two of Kevin's books prior to Play Bigger. And I think Kevin speaks very affectionately and in a laudatory way about what a great guy he is.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And then, for me in the very beginning, I think probably the first one that knocked me over was Michael Gerber's The E-Myth.
Oh, wow. That actually was another one that I forgot about that one. I read that very early on. That's a fantastic book. I'd say it goes nicely with Built to Last.
Yeah, and if you're an entrepreneur and you have not read the E-Myth,
You need to read that book.
yeah, Run, Don't Walk, download it immediately. It's an easy read, and I mean that in a positive way. Very well written, very easy to consume, and Michael Gerber is a business genius, and frankly, I think he's a gift to entrepreneurship and a gift to the world, as corny as that might sound. And I'm so glad he still continues. You know, he writes. He's written many books since then. Actively speaking and still leading the charge for entrepreneurship and smaller businesses. You know, another one that really was important to me early was Ogilvy on Advertising by David Ogilvy. He helped inform a lot of my thinking about marketing and about business. And then,
Interesting.
yeah, did you read that book?
No.
Yeah, great book. And he came across. I remember as a young guy, you know, I was 18 or 19 when I read it, and you know, he sort of felt like this salty old British dog, you know, kind of, he sort of had this, he's kind of grumpy, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And I love those. First of all, I love grumpy old men in general, and grumpy old British men, you know. I come from a Scottish background, so like that's a particular kind of you know, very Ebenezer Scrooge kind of a grumpy thing. So I loved him. And then Al Reese and Jack Trout, Positioning, 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing, Marketing Warfare, all of their books, really, they actually, in my opinion, as a team, I haven't read the books they've written independently, but I mean, I've read some of them, but not all of them. But I read, I think, all of them that the two of them wrote, and absolute genius work.
Well, not a business book, but did you ever read The Alchemist?
I did not. Yeah.
It's a good read. Yeah, it's a good read.
Why do you think it's good for business people?
Um, I would say it's good, maybe better for entrepreneurs specifically.
Yeah.
Um, believing in your mission. Um, I believe the way it's phrased towards the end of the book is, if you want something badly enough, the universe will conspire.
Yeah, but there's another part of it, which is you can't just sit in your basement picking your butt, drinking beer,
Well,
and
certainly,
have the universe. No, I think some
certainly.
people think that. They think, oh,
Well, we talked about this with Amy, didn't we?
yeah, if I have a vision board, check out the Amy Marin
Episode.
episode, right? If
Yeah.
I just have the vision board and I
Everything will
vision
come.
it.
Everything will come.
She tells a funny story, I think,
About the
about
car,
that.
the car. I think it
The
is.
woman who was visioning the car.
Yeah, she's just gonna wish it so.
Yeah, I'm just going to sit here and just
No,
poop it
of
out.
course, there's action required, but the point is that when you put
Hey, I'm cooperating.
when you put your intention out into the world, the universe conspires.
Yes, yes. As long as you act in alignment with your intention, I agree. It's actually funny how the universe conspires. It really, um, well,
It
yeah,
can
you want to hear funny?
it cooperates, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Well, where do you think "Be careful what you wish for" came from?
yeah, but it's interesting. The universe just conspires.
It cooperates,
Yeah, do you want to hear a quick story about that?
please.
So, I was just in Las Vegas to speak at Suite World, NetSuite's conference. And actually, there's a story about NetSuite and Sally's company I want to tell you as well. But this is a tangent to the pre-tangent.
Okay.
Um, and I'm flying out of there. It's the day after I'm getting out of Dodge, and I'm sitting there, and I'm got my laptop open, and there's a guy sitting right next to me, and I'm actually working on some Legends and Losers shit.
Mm-hmm.
And he sort of looks over at my laptop, and he just sparks up a conversation with me, which was a little bit peculiar. But you know, I'm used to it. People come out and talk to me a lot. So, anyway, we end up having an amazing conversation, and this guy is a former Silicon Valley lawyer, and we have a lot of friends who are, you know, in common, and people that we know, and guys we did deals with, and this and that. So before you know it, we're trading old war stories. And sort of just laughing about, hey, you never know who, you know, sits down next to you in an airport, kind of a thing. And then I also find out he teaches entrepreneurship. So we start talking about entrepreneurship. and we have an amazing conversation about that, and we exchange business cards, and we've gotten in touch since then, and hopefully we'll get together. He just seemed like a cool guy to know.
Mm-hmm.
So that conversation happens. That's
Okay.
before I get on the plane. Then
Awesome.
I get off the plane, and I got my earbuds in. I was actually listening to a podcast,
Mm-hmm.
and this guy comes up to me and taps me on the shoulder, and he kind of introduces himself to me, and he says, I know who you are, and I know about Play Bigger and Legends and Losers, and I'm thinking it's a little. He's catching me a little off guard, but I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe he was at the conference or
Right.
whatever. And then he says, look, I got to tell you, I was sitting behind you and that guy,
Mm-hmm.
and I started to eavesdrop on your conversation because it was kind of fascinating, and I couldn't help myself. I just kept listening, and while you guys were talking, he says, I learned all about you. I Googled you. He's telling me all this. And we're in the fucking San Jose airport, right? And this conversation's happening as we're walking,
Right.
towards the exit of the airport. And, well, it turns out that this guy is a professor of entrepreneurship as well, out of college.
No
And
way. What a coincidence.
yeah. And so we have a great conversation as well about entrepreneurship. And he said, look, the reason I'm stopping you is I'd like to invite you to come and speak at our school.
Wow.
And so all that happens, right?
What school is this?
I'm not sure I want to say yet, so I will just.
But it's a very prestigious school.
It is legit. This is not. This is not like Colin and Christopher's École de I don't know what. Yeah, no, this is legit.
Well, that's incredible. Very happy to hear that.
Yeah, and so I think you're right. When you're on purpose, the universe conspires, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, so I got this other story. This speaking in the NetSuite suite world. So
Okay.
So it's let me see if I can get the days right. So I'm showing up on a Wednesday. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm showing up on a Wednesday. I speak to my friends at NetSuite on the Monday, and I come to find out that they have a bookstore on the trade show floor. There's, I don't know, 6,000 or 8,000 people at this conference. It's a good sized conference in Vegas, and they got a bookstore. And I said, "Oh, great! That's awesome." I said, "Well, are you selling Play Bigger?" And they go, "Oh, shit." And I went, "Oh, that's a bummer because if you're going to sell it, we could do a book signing. I'm happy to do that. It's always fun." And they say, "Well, we'd love to. How do we get a whole bunch of copies?" And all of a sudden, the folks at NetSuite are the marketing organization is a stunner.
Why is that?
Because they just, Jennifer Smith Donner just went to work, and her team just went mental on how do we get these books here. And then I put her in touch with our guest today, Sally at 800 CEO Read, because they couldn't get the quantity they wanted because they wanted to buy a bunch of them. God bless them.
Mm-hmm.
So this all goes down. So this all happens late Monday and into Tuesday morning. So Sally doesn't really get the bell rung until Tuesday, I think, if I'm remembering this right. Anyway, the net of it is they get like a meaningful number of books. I think it was 200 or 300. I think it was 200, something like that. In 24 hours to Las Vegas at Sweet World. And
Incredible.
so, I just wanted to say thank you to Sally and Andrew at 800 CEO Read, and to Ashley at George P. Johnson, and of course Jennifer and Jason Maynard himself, the head of marketing, and the rest of the team at NetSuite and 800 CEO Read, who made that happen, because it absolutely blew me away.
That's fantastic.
Right?
Teamwork.
All right. And, this is fun too. This just showed up. Can you see this?
Sort of. Oh, yeah. Pac-Man in Japanese.
It's funny. Carrie said it looked like Pac-Man too. No, this is the cover of the Chinese version of Play Bigger.
But that is Pac-Man.
Well, the first thing she said is, "Who decided to put Pac-Man on the cover it?" I know it of it. I don't know. I think maybe that's what they category kings do. They eat everybody else. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just guessing, man. I mean, all you got are all these Chinese characters, and then like,
80.
you know, Al Ramadan, and then yeah,
Oh,
80%.
wait, what is it? It says Al Ramadan?
Yeah, well, look down here. It's got our names, and they have them in English as well as in
So what's the 80
Chinese.
for then?
I have no fucking idea. There's a giant 80%. For those of you not watching on YouTube, there's a giant 80% on the front of the book underneath the Pac-Man. I don't know what that means.
Is that like, was there supposed to be a space in there, but that's what it converted to, like the 20%?
I listen. It's all Chinese to me, man.
But that's play bigger in Japanese.
In Chinese, look at that. See, play bigger,
Chinese.
and they tell me this is Chinese. Yeah.
Well, there you go.
So I know it's we're
Why,
we're huge in China.
I wonder why
We're huge China. All right. Why don't you tell people about Sally?
Sally Haldorson says her job at 800 CEO Reads general manager is to make 800 CEO Read a great place to work for her employees and a consistently higher performing customer service organization for clients, authors, and partners. That's a fantastic mission statement. In addition to her general manager duties, she reads, writes, reviews, curates, and edits for the company. Outside of work, she is most likely to be found hitting a tennis ball or hanging out with her boys, her husband, child, dog at home. Now, our dialogue with the legendary Sally.
And I think it's been a sea change in business over the past, since the 80s, I guess I would say that, when In Pursuit of Excellence came out, the Tom Peters book, which was sort of the first book that really advocated for a humanistic approach to management of the people in your company. And that over those, I guess now 25 plus years, I'm not going to get that date entirely correct, but that we've grown increasingly accepting of it, embracing the human aspect of business and the people who are on the ground and the people who are in the C-suite. And that is a trend, if you want to say that it's a trend, or if it's just a change in business books over time. We see a lot of human behavior books. We see a lot of material that is oriented to understanding one another. Work-life balance is big. And that is sort of, we no longer have that fear of interacting with business as human beings. And we're going to have, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, Sally, so are you suggesting that a conversation called "How do I have a legendary life" and "How do I have a legendary career / business" are morphing into one and the same conversation?
I believe that it is. You have a book coming out in April from Adam Grant, the Wharton professor who wrote Original, and Sheryl Sandberg wrote a book together called Option B, and that comes out of results from her experience of losing her husband while she's running a huge part of Facebook, and that these two things aren't separate, right? When we're talking about women striving to have a more predictable or open place at the table, when we're talking about men being able to bring their personal lives into the workplace in a more synergistic kind of way. I think that that is the conversation to be having right now, that everything is interlocked, and how we perform at work is affected by how we are impacted by our lives and vice versa. And we shouldn't be afraid to talk about that.
It's so interesting to hear that that's a big trend in business books, and I'm so glad. And sometimes people talk about it as a woman's issue or a man's issue, but the reality is we're human beings at work, There's no
Mhm.
difference between the Sally and Christopher that shows up at
Mhm.
the office and the Sally and Christopher that shows up at home. And, you know, one of the things that we've certainly been striving to drive a conversation around is exactly that. How do I, if you take this notion of category design, life design, business design, those are all one and the same thing. If you ask the question, how do I have a legendary life? My work life is part of my life.
Mhm.
And we're not robots, are we?
Right. That's absolutely true. And I think that um, it's interesting that, you know, we can, as individual people, we have a certain responsibility to accept the idea that life can be designed, as you said, like that we can aim to bring ourselves to work and to have emotional connections with the people that we work with, to have an intellectual and emotional response to the work that we do, that we have some sort of purpose, that this is an effort that is our responsibility. But then on the flip side, we have organizations who are taking it very seriously to offer the kind of structure, or sometimes structureless, uh, management and leadership that leads to people being comfortable in being themselves in the workplace. And I think what that does then is it inspires the work that you do. When we have 15 people here at 800 CEO Read, and sometimes we are family, sometimes we are friends, sometimes we are colleagues, and that it's okay to experience 8-9 hours of the workday as a human being and not as whatever role that you're plugged into.
You know, and isn't it funny? We have all these notions about these old notions about the separation of work from our life. And I think to your point, Sally, this conversation around that, you know, our colleagues shouldn't be our friends. Well, you wouldn't want to have your coworker be your friend, because if you had to make a business decision and your personal relationship got in the way of that, you know, that was the thinking 20, 30 and beyond, right? And
Right.
that always seemed insane to me, because if you and I are working together and we have a strong relationship that is intermingled, well, yeah, if you have to fire me, that might make it a little harder. But that's kind of a shitty way to think about it, isn't it? Shouldn't we be thinking about it more of, if you and I have a deep, meaningful relationship where we are centered on a set of values and a set of objectives and outcomes that we want to drive for our company and our careers, and I happen to know about you and your family, and you happen to know about me and my family, like, doesn't that make us better colleagues?
I think inherently, empathy makes us better people, right? And empathy allows us to do better work. I'm sure that this is not unfamiliar to you coming out of marketing and writing about what you write, that it's all important to know where the heart is, right? That whether you're selling a product, whether you're assisting, you know, our company is based on the relationships that we have with publishers and authors. And if we don't embrace the fact that there are real people invested in the success of their own books, that there are people who are incredibly passionate about working in publishing, if we don't acknowledge that, then we can't provide good service. We can't provide the kind of service that makes our relationships with them as singular as they are. And that is across the board with any kind of business.
Yeah. And so what are the big business books right now, you know, that you're thinking about that sort of bring the human element to work, that have you guys at 800 CEO Read excited?
I'm going to look up a title here because I want to make sure that I'm getting it right. If you don't mind.
I don't mind at all, Sally.
Thank you. Um,
You could take me on any journey you want to take me on.
let's see. Okay, this is the one that I wanted to point to. We have the book's name the name of the book is called Solve for Happy, and it's from Mo Gadot, Google's chief business officer. And what's interesting, and how this relates to sort of my opening salvo about Amy Krauss Rosenthal, is that his story is all about he also experienced loss in the death of his son. And in his response to that impact on his personal life, he wrote this book, Solve for Happy. From his, as we all know, Google is very invested in helping their employees in sort of finding themselves. They've come out with several books. They have a lot of investment within the company about, meditation and finding practices that can then kind of give you a peaceful work experience. And so in connection with that kind of work that Google does, he came out with this book, Solve for Happy, which essentially is an equation that you can perform to improve your happiness quotient in your life. And while that seems somewhat antithetical to how we feel about happiness, that we're supposed to be, inspired, or we're supposed to be inherently happy, that there are things that we can do in order to achieve that state. And I think that is representative of a number of books that have come out that say that we do have some sort of control over the point of view that we have, that we wake up in the morning and ask what we can do rather than what can be done to us.
So I'm curious if you've seen the movie by Rocco Bellic, Happy, the documentary film.
No, I have not.
Well, I would highly recommend it to you. It's based on the scientific research into happiness, and it's a fascinating movie. It's one I recommend everybody, and I really recommend you open a glass of wine with one or two or more people that you love. And it's the kind of movie where you can sort of sit there and watch a segment and pause it and talk about it. And anyway, the thing that sparked me in this concept of Solve for Happy is, this used to be considered to be mushy, airy-fairy, left coasty crapola, give me a spreadsheet and let's talk about margins and EBITDA and let's get on with this bullshit, right?
Right.
And one of the things in Rocco's movie, Happy, he goes to Japan. And one of the saddest parts in the film is he starts to talk about the number of, in particular, young Japanese men who die at work. And there's a word, and you'll forgive me for not remembering the word, but there's a Japanese word that has shown up to describe men who work themselves to death. And I forget what age range they targeted around, but, I think it's men sort of plus, if I remember, plus or minus sort of 25 to 45. It's not people that you would expect to be dying of heart attacks at work. And there's this new word for it, and they even have songs about it, and they show scenes from memorials and stuff that are incredibly heartbreaking. And so, if you sort of take that as the extreme, right, that people literally can work themselves to death by doing work that doesn't make them happy. It's interesting to see one of the most innovative companies in the world and having one of their most senior executives come forward and have this conversation, and now to hear about Sheryl Sandberg's upcoming book. Obviously one of the most high profile executives, period, never mind women executives, period. And obviously she wrote a huge book with Lean In a few years ago, beginning to have a conversation called Can We Be Happy at Work? And so is this a big trend you see going forward, Sally?
Generally speaking, you see a lot of human behavior and social science books right now. And some of that stems from a strictly management inspired place, right? Is how we get the most out of the people who are working for us, how we understand difficult people that we're working with. And I think that does speak to the fact that we are regarding one another as humans and not cogs. But there's also the sense that we can always be doing better. It's an interesting, what I think about the West Coast, sort of Silicon Valley. So we're a little company in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and we're family owned, woman owned.
How's the cheese?
Well, we've just 2 blocks from here. You can go get plenty of cheese at our public market. But, you know,
Sorry, I'm being silly for no reason.
it's
That's
okay.
going to
There's
happen.
gotta
I
be a
just can't
cheese and a
control
beer
myself.
question, right? I'm surprised it wasn't a beer question. But
Well,
the beer,
do cheese and beer go together?
maybe not for me, I don't think I'd say, but there's certainly what's wonderful about Milwaukee right now is the fact that the sort of makers culture is really strong here. And we happen to be in
What do you mean by makers culture, Sally?
we have a lot of, and that was not a cheese joke, culture. Anyway,
Boom.
yeah, exactly. So in the neighborhood that we just moved to, we ended up moving to a larger space in the last year, and we ended up we're in an up and coming, pre-gentrification, whatever you want to call it. All the good restaurants are here.
So are you trying to say that 800 CEO Read is getting its hipster going?
Oh, it's, I think
Are the
we've
guys
all
growing
aged out.
mustaches and beards and
Yeah,
stuff? And
we've all aged out. Like the men here, no offense to them, cannot rock the man bun. It's not going to happen.
well, I never could rock the man bun
Yeah,
at any age, but
right. So, but that is sort of part of what we're experiencing here. But also that comes with a lot of breweries that are opening a small, homebrew kind of.
are they in this
beer.
this new emerging category now that's being called craft beer?
Exactly. On a very small scale, we have probably 5 within walking distance. One of them is a cider company. We have a couple cheese places, so there's, I think, that crafting or the making, which, that was a really big theme in business books probably 10, 15 years ago, was sort of, you saw that in magazine, you saw Make magazine, and you saw Chris Anderson talking a lot about, making things for free and what we could do with a maker's culture. And we talk about 3D printing. And so we have that sort of discussion about what people can do on their own, right? That we don't need big warehouses. We don't need big, printing presses. We don't need, we can do so much on our own with self-publishing and all of that kind of stuff. So it is good to see that sort of a maker's culture, whether it comes in like actual beverages or it comes from an entrepreneurial perspective for a small business, then it feeds that kind of energy.
And Sally, do you see a connection between what's going on in technology and what you're describing as this maker's culture?
I think we're in an interesting place right now, aren't we? Where we have, I think we have a little bit of pushback against technology. I think that, we have a lot of people writing about the dangers of technology to the social interaction that human beings have, right? We talk a lot about when people work mobily versus in an office, and how people can continue to relate and create when we aren't all together in a room. We have,
but isn't that amazing? I mean,
mm-hmm.
I look at it today and just think about the things that we can do for the money that we can do them for, right? I mean, this technology from Zoom that you and I are using right now to have this conversation. I mean, if you wanted to buy this 10 years ago, you were talking about several $1 million from a company like IBM or Cisco
Mm-hmm.
or HP. And there's a free version of this. And so you just, and of course, me growing up in Silicon Valley, you look at just the cloud technology by itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that you can have enterprise class accounting software in the cloud for so much cheaper than you could before, and so much shareware out there, and all the new collaboration technologies and Google Hangouts and all of this stuff, and all these new Bazoomer applications and so forth. I mean, what it costs to start a company and to find a manufacturer in another part of the world, or to your point, collaborate with people around the world. The company pursuing results that produces legends and losers on the back end. They have a consortium of people that they use all around the world in different time zones and so forth. And so we can knit together these networks of people and resources at a relatively low cost that we never could before to deliver all kinds of products and services.
I think it is tremendous, right? That it's a great way for a company to stay lean. And yet at the same time, we have to make sure that we're always asking that counter question, which is, what does that then do to our workforce? One of the common questions is how does it, create barriers between people if you're not actually, that we can ask an existential question of, are you and I actually having a conversation if we're not having a conversation one-on-one in person? I think yes, but that you also
how does it feel to you? Does it feel like you're having a conversation?
I think technology in terms of connecting people is tremendous. None of the hesitation that some people do about whether Facebook interactions can or should replace friendships or that kind of stuff.
But don't you think that's a stupid conversation?
I find it very interesting that people are so engaged with it, right? I find it.
The way, isn't it just simple? I mean, look, nothing's better than you and I being able to sit down face to face and have a coffee or a beer or whatever we want, or go do something together or go work on something together, for sure. That said, right now that's not plausible. You're in Milwaukee, I'm in California. And if we needed to wait till you and I could get together and go arm in arm down the street and go have that beer and have this conversation, then, that would take a long time. And one of us has to get on a plane and blah, blah, yada, yada. And so do I see technology as a replacement for that? No. Would I like to get together and have that beer with you? Absolutely. And we will.
Right.
But that said, whether it's this kind of a communication or, I think about connecting with people on Facebook, it doesn't replace that. But doesn't it supplement it, particularly with people that we don't have an opportunity to get together with face to face on a regular basis? I mean, isn't it nice to see that, your friend who lives in a different state or a different part of the world, at least a little what they're up to in their life when you see what's going on in their Facebook feed? It's a light touch. Of course, it doesn't replace the human touch, but it's better than nothing, isn't it?
I think for someone who is generally introverted, it's fantastic, right? It solves a lot of my inabilities to connect to people if I can do it in a way that doesn't force me out of some of my comfort zone areas. Like, on Facebook, I can be in touch with, like you said, it's a light touch with more people, and it isn't, spending an hour on a phone call. It isn't. And some people feel a loss to that, right? It's the same people who feel a loss to letter writing, and that letter writing was a lost art, and what happened to that. But to segue this all back around, doesn't Facebook connections, Zoom connections, however else that we're communicating, isn't it very similar to the way that we always communicated via the book? Right? So I can know you from Play Bigger. I can know some of what you're thinking through the book that you published. You can know some of what I'm thinking through the article that I write. That we have always used supplements to accentuate the human connection, right? We've used books for as long as the ability to communicate that way has been available to us.
And isn't that wonderful? Like, because I've read your work online and I know, and thank you so much for reading Play Bigger, that you've read it, and that when we then meet and have a discussion, look, I'm not stupid. I know that I don't know you, but I feel kind of like I do. And hopefully you do too. The book's been an amazing experience for me because I meet all these people, and you could tell that, they're sort of relationship wise on second base with me when I just meet them, because they feel like they know me because they read the book. And at first it's a bit of a strange experience, but the reality is it's kind of a great experience because you and I start at a place that we couldn't start at before, because we both know we have these shared interests and some shared values. And therefore I'm more excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, it's the same thing as we've, again, been trying to communicate through books, is you're finding your community, right? You're finding your people. And there's plenty of that happening online. It's plenty of that happening on Reddit or whatever, wherever you want to Instagram.
Yeah.
But this gives us a chance to communicate messaging that unites people. And while sometimes I think that some of these larger like life topics can seem to people to be a stretch for business books,
Yeah.
I think it's such an important acknowledgement that people spend so much time at work, and their experience at work needs to be one that, per the movie that you referenced, doesn't kill them, whether literally or figuratively. And that's one of the great benefits of the business book category, is that it connects people and drives community and drives change. And without that, work would become, I think, far more stagnant in terms of its evolution. Sort of what I was getting at with referencing Silicon Valley, and our small company here, is that we read all of these books about incredibly progressive corporate cultures and company policies and all that kind of stuff. And it doesn't necessarily, we can't embrace them 100. We can't do Netflix unlimited time off, or we can't but it helps set the sights further along, right? It helps expand the material that we have to work with, and we can say what works for our small company. And that is a little bit what I think is the great gift that Play Bigger gives any reader who reads it, is that not everybody is out there to conquer a category, to redefine it in all of the multidimensional ways that you suggest in the book to do that. But it does give you this idea that perhaps you can redefine, or perhaps you can pick out a differentiation that isn't just by accident, but is you can claim it, and you can step out and be bold about it.
Well, and maybe let's talk a little bit about CEO Read in that context, right? Because when I share about you folks, and I say to people, hey, there's this small book company online that is a category king in the face of what you could argue is maybe the greatest category king company alive today in their core market of books. You say, well, how is it possible one company could differentiate in such a way? Both, in Play Bigger, the book, of course, we talk about product, company, and category, and you got to get all three things right to become a category king. So maybe, could you shed some light on how does a small book company in Wisconsin with the cheese and the breweries become if you will, a mini or micro mini category king in the face of Amazon.com?
Well, we have a long history in books, is the first thing, right? We stem out of an independent bookstore chain here in Milwaukee called the Harry W. Schwartz Bookshops. And from that independent chain, which has since closed, and we are what is left, we originated as my first boss, Jack Covert, who was given the responsibility for growing the business and computer section of this bookstore chain, because this was the new big thing, right?
And when was that?
That was 30 some years ago. So I think it would be late 70s, perhaps.
So that was when the focus on, or the added focus on business bookstores.
Yeah.
When did you guys decide you were going to plant your flag online?
Well, that was the evolutionary part, right? Is the benefit of being a small and nimble company is that you tried to sense the trends and evolve to them. So my story there is that I started here in 1997, and I was hired.
And you were what, about 12 at the time, Sally? Is that just a child prodigy, were you not?
I had just finished grad school, actually, very useful English and creative writing degree. And needed to go back to school needed to go back to work because my husband had moved here and supported me and wanted to go back to school. And because I love books, I got a job at Schwartz Business Books, which is what we were called then. And I was hired to be the 5th customer service person in response to the new catalog that we were putting out, back when we had the paper catalog with all of the books and the book descriptions. And we would send that out to our mailing list, and the faxes would start rolling in. That's how long ago.
Back in the day when faxes printed money.
Exactly.
Remember when that noise started? That
so good, right?
You're like, oh, we're going to get another one.
Yep, you get the purchase orders, the whole thing. And one of the things that worked really well with our company then was that purchasing in corporations was different back then, right? You had librarians, you had a corporate library, you had purchase orders and requests and all of that kind of stuff that they needed someone to fulfill those orders. So that was sort of where we were then, that we were fulfilling orders for corporations even then, but through this different approach. Anyway, so we waited for the fax machine to start gutting out the faxes, and it never happened because in 1997 was when Amazon exploded. And Amazon totally ate our lunch that quarter or however long that it lasted, and we had to adapt to that. And one of the ways that we did was sort of take advantage of this this relationship that we had with corporations and understanding what they need and what they read. We had these great long-standing relationships with publishers in New York that over time had been created, and we were able to start talking to them about what their authors needed and what they needed. So parallel that to all of the changes with technology and all of the changes with the publishing industry in reaction to ebooks and in reaction to Amazon. And the publishing industry has become less able to manage all of the things that authors need with this mass amount of platform building that has to happen now to get a book on the road.
Do you think it's a little bit akin to what's happened in music, in that it sort of feels like the musicians have been forgotten, that the authors have been forgotten, that there's this whole ecosystem and all that, and it's kind of leaves the author out in the woods, like, well, what do I do now as a business book author? How do I be successful in a world where, especially at Amazon, right, where they sell absolutely everything under the sun now, as a business book author, how can they really serve me in promoting my book and in helping me build, awareness around what, of course, you mentioned at the top is, every business book author is incredibly passionate about why they did what they did and wrote what they wrote.
Yeah, I think that, you could say that our company is the reverse of the algorithm, right? Is that we try to respond to each of the author and each author and each, representative of the publishing community individually, that this is what the author needs. While the algorithms that drive the big companies, they are certainly smart and they do things that we're not capable of doing. But as you said, we need to then focus more on what we are able to do. And the strength there is in the sort of consulting aspect with authors to encourage them to believe that, and this is in response, of course, to the way that business authors sort of get their name out there and build their platform, is really through their speaking engagements and through their following online, which is something that's happened, more strongly over the past, I'd say 15, 20 years. But I think that what's interesting to your first question was, does this forget the author? And I would say no, that actually the author is even more important now than it was, because the publishing company is only able to do so much when they are handling so many authors and there's so many restrictions on what they're able to do. It's really, the onus is on the author, his or herself, to build that platform, get that following, to make super fans who are going to follow them and see them, speaking engagements, pre-orders for books, driving those numbers up for bestseller consideration, getting the articles, getting the reputation. So it actually becomes more about the author and more about the author's message than it is about how that message gets communicated via book, online.
And these are skills most authors don't have, right? That they're experts in whatever their domain is. And, I know for me, even as a quote unquote marketing guy, you write a book and then you discover, I'll never forget when we handed in our manuscript, Jim Levine, our agent, said, congratulations guys, you've done half the work. And I remember feeling like he had just kicked me in the nuts. You've done half the work. And he said essentially what you
Hard
just said,
enough,
which is
right?
now you got to go out there and build a platform and make your book work in the world. And even as a marketer, I know a lot about marketing, but I don't know a lot about book marketing, and I sure don't know how to make a book a quote unquote platform. If you ask me about how to do that with enterprise technology, I can help you. And so it is an amazing thing that you differentiated on a niche called business books,
Mm-hmm.
and by really focusing on relationships with authors and publishers. It seems old-fashioned what you're talking about.
Right. I don't know how familiar you are with Seth Godin's work. I'm assuming pretty familiar.
I am, and I'm sure he wouldn't remember meeting me, but I met him a couple times back in the old days. And the thing I'll say about Seth Godin, what year, Sally, did Permission Marketing come out? 97, 98, something like that?
Yeah,
Maybe 99?
about then. Maybe a little earlier than that.
Yeah, okay. And I remember it coming out at the time, and it was such genius. And, do you want to sort of share the premise of the book?
I'd have to reach way back in my head there. There's been so many Seth
Yeah.
Godin. Yeah.
It was his first book, though, wasn't it? If I remember right.
Oh,
I remember the concept was so powerful, which was this notion of he reframed the marketing experience that most of us had at the time, which he called interruption marketing.
okay.
And he says in there that most marketing sort of bangs at you when you don't want it.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about a future where you opt into stuff, and therefore the marketer has your permission to market to them, because one person's spam is another person's valuable content.
Mm-hmm.
The irony to me about that is we have more interruption marketing on the internet today than ever before. You go to most websites and it's like a fucking whack-a-mole just trying to get rid of the ads. And like this
just getting worse too.
Tiny little bar of text and all this stuff that pops up and all that stuff. And so I keep hoping for the future of permission marketing to take hold. But he has certainly built an amazing platform for himself, and Seth's really become one of the most important marketing thinkers and frankly business thinkers in the world, with I don't even know how many books. I think my other favorite one other than that was Purple Cow. I thought that was
the big one that I recall working on a lot. And then since then, Linchpin was a big one in terms of how people can sort of enact some more marketing for themselves in the workplace. And he just, he is the idyllic example of platform building, right? That he has used this permission marketing to engage with people to the point where it's, regardless of the books that he's published and put out, whether he's done it himself or whether he's done it through publishing companies, that he himself has garnered this following that allows him to communicate his message on an almost nonstop basis, right? Whether it's through these many, many books or through his everyday blog, and that his reach has become tremendous, right? It's not just in business, but it's anyone who's a striver, as we like to call people who are engaged with this kind of work, that he, if any author wants to say, like, who do I want to be as a business book author, Seth Godin is pretty good model, right?
And how would you compare, Seth Godin to, somebody that is newer at this, but has obviously built a giant platform and following, like a Tim Ferriss?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Tim Ferriss has extreme, his point of view is extreme. His actions and how he researches his books are, so he does this sort of extreme marketing of himself as well, and is exploring all different corners of trying to drive attention and drive sales of his books, drive interaction on the internet. And what's interesting about his approach is that he's sort of diversified. He's gone beyond the 4-hour work week and gone into more of a lifestyle sort of bent. And he and I think many authors right now are pushing up against a limit of this kind of platform building, right?
What you mean he's going to break the platform build? He's too big, or what do you mean?
I think it's we're all so fast now, right? We all know the tips and tricks. We know when people are trying to get our attention, right? This is something that as you said, when someone's banging on your door all the time, and that's not to criticize him. It's just saying that the market responds in a quick fashion to these people who are really pushing the envelopes, and we want to sort of, if you're playing, I say playing, but if you're pursuing the bestseller game, right? You're trying to get on the New York Times bestseller list. You're trying to get on in Wall Street Journal, BookScan, all of that. That there are ways that you can sell your books to that end.
But let me ask you this
we're
question.
Finding that out, right?
It's something that I've struggled a lot with, and it was something that held me back from wanting to do Legends and Losers. I can't stand the Kardashianization of our world. I hate that I live in a world where I have to know who those morons are. And, if you circle back to a little bit earlier, Sally, in our discussion about the technology, we live in this look at me, social selfie, self-promotional,
right.
What did I have for breakfast on my Instagram bullshit world. And I really struggled with both with the book Play Bigger and with Legends and Losers. How do I do something that I authentically in my heart, as corny as it sounds, really thinks matters, really think matters. I believe that category design can make a material difference in the success of businesses around the world. I really do believe that. And I really do believe that having an authentic conversation about what it takes to live a legendary life and design a legendary business is a conversation worth having. And I know that I have to promote those things for them to be successful. But at the same time, and this may sound like bullshit, it is absolutely not. I don't want to be a famous person. I don't want to be, the last thing I want to be is a fucking Kardashian. And so, I care about the ideas. I care about entrepreneurship. I care about people seizing the opportunities they have in front of them and creating their own new opportunities. I care deeply about those things. And I know that there's some amount of promotion that has to get done. And I know I have to. So I guess my point is, how do you find that line between really giving a shit about what you're committed to and how you want to make a difference, and yet not going over and turning yourself into a fucking Kardashian?
Right. I think that, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, actually. There was a time when we felt that the main thing that we as a company needed to do was rediscover our purpose. Like, we felt like we had suddenly gotten away from, in this effort to grow, in this effort to compete with West and East Coast companies, that we needed to get back to the basics, right? And so our motto, for lack of a better word, our purpose, the thing that drives us every day, is that we believe in books. That's as simple as it gets. And every decision that we make.
But how can you say that in a world? I hate to interrupt you, Sally, but
okay.
I'll never forget when we first started to even think about Play Bigger, or the book. So many people said to us, "Oh, nobody reads anymore. Don't millennials don't read, and even baby boomers don't have time, and don't we're in a Twitter world and in a Snapchat world, and everything's 140 characters and emojis and infographics. So, you're wasting your time." That was sort of one thread. And then the other thread was, well, if you have to write a dumb book, then, shouldn't it be full of infographics and blog posts and big pictures with, cartoon, because that's the only thing that's going to, some buffoonery that, and ultimately, Al, Dave, Kevin, and I had to decide to, you say, look, you know what, we don't care about any of that, that ultimately we got to write the book that we think is substantive and we think is going to matter, and we're going to live and die by that. And so I guess my question is, how do you combat the people who say that, well, nobody reads anymore, and so why bother write, never mind read a business book?
Well, the first important thing is that the numbers prove out that all of that fear mongering that happened 5 years ago or so has proven not to be true, right? That ebooks have not taken over the world. Not that ebooks are bad in any way. I think that this is where we get back to, again, this idea that we don't lose the author and we don't lose the message just because we change the medium, right? That it's not the loss of the paper book. It's when we change it to a digital file, right? That the message and the intent and the creativity is still alive, and it just happens to be funneled in a different way. And so I think that that's important, that we have to put some of this fear mongering that all of a sudden we're so scared that the book in and of itself is going away, and the numbers are proving that is not true. That
so maybe just if I could interrupt,
yeah.
What is happening with the numbers of physical business books? Maybe unpack that a little.
The numbers of physical books in general are really strong, and stronger than ebook sales. Ebook sales were definitely on an upward trend, and then they've either flattened or tapered off.
So what percentage of business books today are physical versus digital?
That's a good question. I couldn't tell you exactly what that is, but we can certainly dig into it.
But you're seeing growth in physical books.
Absolutely. The response is really strong, and partially what drives that strength is the fact that the genre, and we're circling back around again to the same theme, is that the genre has expanded. The genre has expanded to include books that reach beyond leadership and management and marketing and sales.
A lot of self-help books and
personal development, cultural kind of that tie-in between big ideas and the world around us. Globalization has forced us to do that, right? We have to think about the political, we have to think about the social, the cultural, and that sort of push the boundaries. But the work that we end up doing then is to make sure that all of those categories are well represented within this business book genre. Like, what are business people reading?
Yeah.
That's a much different question than what business books are out there.
Okay, so what are business people reading? What are the things? I mean, I noticed some things on the site today I wanted to touch on, but tell me, what are people reading? What are people excited about?
Well, I think if we go back to our 2016 awards books, the ones that and that's how you and I were introduced, because you were one of the awards short finalists. With
proud to be nominated.
Yes, exactly. With
it's an honor just to be here.
That with Bill Taylor, he won the category that Play Bigger was in.
Congratulations, Bill, and we don't hate you, we love you.
And his work, I think, is an interesting. It's a smaller scale message to Play Bigger. Something that it's called Simply Brilliant, for those people who aren't aware of his book. But it is it's a book that is also telling businesses and leaders that they can make small changes to their business that come from a place of purpose, as we were talking about before. That the way to not lose yourself amongst all of this pressure to be shiny and recognizable is to find that core purpose and then build off that belief, whether it's just how you change how you welcome people when they come in your door. And with Play Bigger, it was sort of taking that same idea and blowing it up 10 times. Go ahead.
I've heard from a lot of people that they're reading the books together. I mean, I don't know which one they start with, but that the two sort of go somewhat hand in glove. And frankly, we're just glad that people think that. Simply
No.
Brilliant is a simply brilliant book.
Yeah, and he's a tremendous thinker, business thinker, and Mavericks at Work is a really essential book if you're trying to create a corporate culture that works for the people within it. But it does take the same idea that you have to find that purpose within your company, and then you can either extrapolate on that in a small way, or you can take it and make this plan, like Play Bigger, and grow it out in these really important ways in order to become category king. So that's one really strong area of change. Our number one book for last year was a book called What Works by Iris Bonet, and she writes about how confirmation bias and various other ways of thinking are directly related to how women are succeeding in corporations and in any kind of structured organization. And I think that what's important there is the fact that that idea of bias, that idea of human behavior or psychology, is this nugget that we have to start messing with. We have to start sculpting the way we look at the world in order to change a business from the inside.
Isn't that interesting? I mean, in Play Bigger, we address some of the brain science around how
Yep.
people make decisions and how that impacts the way categories work and why one company tends to dominate. But I see this interesting thing going on in business books where on one hand, you have what you and I originally started off talking about, which is sort of the human side. And,
Mm-hmm.
and, I noticed books like, Time, Talent, Energy, and The Best Team Wins, and all these kind of human, and then the search for meaning at work and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the flip side, which is sort of how people's behavior and thinking in the external world impacts your business. My buddy Eddie Yoon's new book, Super Consumers. Right.
Yeah.
And so is that what's going on? You sort of have this, how do we as individuals focus ourselves to have meaning at work? How do we as an organization, Time, Talent, Energy, Best Team Wins, that kind of stuff, come together and work better? And then the psychology or getting in the brain of the new super consumers,
Mm-hmm.
or all the, we mentioned Seth Godin, all the stuff about relationship building with customers and all that. And so it seems like the stuff that, not that long ago, Sally, was mushy and airy-fairy and intangible HRE bullshit,
Right.
is now becoming the hard stuff that we now want to go work on that's got nothing to do with EBITDA.
Right. So here's the funny thing, right, is that even though we're talking about this intent to make people's work experience better, we talk about, culture in terms of like the ideal Silicon Valley kind of company. We talk about how big behemoths need to change within themselves in order to attract millennials. Like that is a huge subject matter right now, is the millennial problem. Which is
what is the millennial problem?
Well, let's finish this. The previous one, of course, is that this is part of the problem, right? Is that as we break down these structures, as we recognize people as individuals within the workplace, we then create chaos, right? There's this potential for chaos. It's like anything else, like, parenting, spare the rod, spoil the child kind of concept from back in the day, that if you don't have rules and regulations, then everything's going to go to hell, right? And that's sort of that same thing that in companies, leaders can make, I'm going to simplify this, right? One of two choices, that you can put rules and regulations and profits and numbers and all of that kind of stuff on as the number one set of guideposts. Or we can say, these are people, these people drive my company, I need to treat them well. And in doing that, I have to embrace the fact that I'm going to get feedback that I'm not going to be comfortable with. I'm going to get personalities who aren't comfortable with one another. I'm going to get opinions, because everybody's got them. And I'm going to have to figure out as a leader how to do something with that. And Simon Sinek is a great author talking about, leaders eat last. And it's not about you, in the sense of that, for this sort of learning for leaders to be okay with their people being people. And that's not something everybody's comfortable with. And that's why we need books about how to manage people as people.
And are we seeing any kind of a resurgence in some of the classic books? The one that pops to my head is a book I read years ago, and I'm surprised I don't think it gets the due that it deserves. Peter Senge's The Fifth Discipline, where he really breaks open this notion of a learning organization and the kinds of communication people need to have authentic dialogues that really open up learning. And I remember reading it so many years ago and thinking, wow, this is a different thing to be talking about. It was sort of the opposite of W. Edwards Deming and process orientation, or if you think about re-engineering the corporation. And I don't take anything away from those books. They were very important, but they were very kind of process analytically oriented and very less people oriented, if you will.
We still see some books like that, as you mentioned. We still see team books. We still see books that sort of stem out of an HR appropriateness, if that's the right word, that companies still need to behave in a certain way. They still need to set expectations. They still need, as we all know, that companies, there's a give and a take when it comes to employees and companies employees. And as the reliability of employment sort of breaks down, and or the millennials, or whatever generation or age group, they come at a company and say, we have expectations. We expect you to provide X, Y, and Z for us. That this becomes, if you want to bring in talent, if you want to max out your category, if you want to see those profits, that some of the more predictable and more like sort of structured goals might be set for a company, that you need to get those people driving toward those goals. You can't forget about them, and you can't just say, people really better be thankful they have jobs.
And if I want to be
not in that place anymore.
Yeah. And if I want to be on the cutting edge of management thinking today, are those the kinds of books that you would recommend I read? Or what would you, if I said to you, hey, what are the 5 books that I should read, in the next month or two to make sure that my thinking is right where it needs to be on the leading edge of business thinking today? Other than, of course, Play Bigger. Sorry.
I think An Everyone Culture from last year, and it's a Harvard Business title, and it was
An Everyone
Business, or I'm sorry, An Everyone Culture.
Everyone Culture.
Yes, by Lisa Leahy and a handful of other authors that I'm not going to be able to say right now. But that's one of those books that walks the line between the hard and the soft, right? It helps manage actual practical situations in a company while also having an inclusiveness that's really important. And I think that books like that they still have their place. When we talk about implementing new ideas here in our company, we understand that we get to see the whole spectrum of contemporary ideas for businesses, but that they aren't always implementable in the way that a larger company or a more wealthy company could do it. And so there are still books that are essential reading for a middle manager who's trying to help make their team a better working team. And that's one of them.
Any others you want to point me to?
Oh boy. Trying to think of.
I just, on your side, it is interesting per the discussion we're having that book number 1 right now is Attitude, Developing a Winning Mindset on and off the court.
Yep.
It's incredible. And the other one I, of course, love is Grit.
Grit is a really interesting, and I think it's an incredibly successful book, in part because it gives power back to the person. This is obviously a theme through much of what we're talking about today, is that the business book category, obviously speaks toward corporations and organizations, but it also speaks to the people within them. And Grit is this story of, just like Option B from Sheryl Sandberg will be a narrative about resilience. That Grit is a narrative about how you can take your own success in your own hands, right? That you're not dependent upon luck, that you're not dependent upon saying the right thing and doing the right thing, but all you need to do is find that place where you can dig in and find the success for yourself. Of course, I'm simplifying her message
Sure.
A lot here,
Yeah.
but that I think the success of that book comes from the fact that it empowers people. And empowerment is, you can go either way on that word, as something that's sort of purposeless now, or something that's actually really valuable.
As Spinal Tap said, there's a fine line between clever and stupid. And I know some people might roll their eyes, but I think empowerment, even if it's overused, is still an important word.
I think it is, because I think we don't often, much like with much language, we don't often think about the true value of empowerment. It's become sort of
my thing with empowerment is always, yes, I think there's a valid conversation to be had around how you as a leader or manager can empower others. That is a very valid conversation.
right.
The one that I don't like is when I hear people say, "Oh, well, I'm not empowered to do that." Well, go fuck yourself. Empower yourself to do that, right? So anyway, that's the flip side of it. Well, no, empowerment is not something that happens to you. It's something that you happen to do to yourself, in my opinion. But, Sally, as we wrap up, is there anything else you sort of like to share that we should, that we should be thinking about modern business books today?
I think that what we need to remember is the fact that business books as a category over the last, I'm completely defying your nod to modern business books for the moment, and say that over time, we see the development of business as a category, as organizations, companies. We can track that from the 1980s, if you want to stay there, through 2017, and watch the transformation of what it means to be a working person in a capitalist society. And that's just inherently, part of the deal. And there are these sort of stops along the way that are big change makers, right? We had, I wish I had a better sense of timeline, but we had that sort of Chris Guillebeau kind of time where it was, leave your job, work for yourself, don't work for the man, don't work for the organization. And we've since evolved from that to make organizations and companies to be softer and more inclusive and more able to change. And that's because the people took the power by saying, you know what, I'm not going to put up with this. I, because of technology, as we mentioned, because of community, finding community through all of these different avenues, we are empowered, we'll use that word, to, again, if we wanted to self-publish, if we wanted to gain a platform, if we wanted to go out and speak, however we want to share our message, however we want to do our work, the people who do the work are now in the driver's seat. And that's changing business and changing corporations for the better. And there's always going to be some kind of resistance there. And there's certainly inertia with really large companies. But podcasts like this one, books like the ones that we recommend on our site, books that we recommended in the 100 Best, are sort of collection of the sort of milestone books that a person who wants to educate themselves in business without going and getting an MBA can do for themselves. Because there's value in all of this information and all of these wonderful thinkers who will help you make the best company that you have, that you can have, or have the best career that you can have, and sort of marry that so that you have a legendary career along with a legendary life, as you said.
Yeah, and I think it's a timeless discussion, and I think sort of you walking us through how to think about how books really show that progression over time is an interesting way to think about it. And I know for me, there's probably about a dozen books, life and business books, that had they not gotten written and had I not read them, you and I aren't having this conversation because I'm working a manual labor job.
Right. There's, curiosity never goes out of style, right? And I don't think, to answer a question you asked much earlier on, when people say, do people still read books, and what are the purpose of books? And that's when books can delve into and explicate an idea or a problem, solve for a problem. There are still people out there who are curious to have those problems solved, who are curious about the world and curious about other people's deep thinking. And I don't think that's ever going to be diluted to the point where we don't have and find value in books.
Well, I think that's a great place to land. And as we land, I just want to say to you also, thank you, Sally. Thank you for being so generous today. And also, as an author, I just want to thank you. Your company's wonderful. You've been wonderful to me and my other Play Bigger authors. And we believe in books too.
Right. Let's live it.
Thank you, Sally. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for the conversation.
Look forward to chatting soon.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, Colin, there it is. Sally Haldorson from 800 CEO Read. Isn't she charming?
What a legend.
Yeah. And, who would have thought if you'd said, hey, you could build a category king company in e-commerce books, that you'd be able to do that?
I'm blown away.
Yeah. And you can see why. I mean, her attitude and her approach permeates through everything that they do as a company. And, obviously I have felt that as an author who they've done a great job with. So I really obviously appreciate their partnership. And if you like this episode, you would probably like our episode with Shaku Atre. So she's an incredible inspiration, isn't she, Colin?
Yes, she is. And yes, you would.
Please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube. This podcast is not free. It costs 2 minutes to give us a legendary review. And where can they find us, Colin?
They can find us on facebook.com/groups/legends and losers. On the Twitter machine @legendslosers. On email, blackhole@legendsandlosers.com.
We would like to thank HarperCollins bestseller Play Bigger, How Pirates, Dreamers, and Innovators Create and Dominate Markets.
Equity Directory, connecting startups to the talent and resources they need to build a legendary business.
Our good friends at onelifefullylive.org, the nonprofit helping you dream, plan, and live your best life.
Outposition.com, legendary marketing and category design in Singapore.
Yeah, Daryl. Our friends at the McChrystal Group, lessons from the battlefield brought to the boardroom.
800 CEO Read, put a legendary book in your brain.
One of the top podcasts in the world, Achieve Your Goals, with our friend Hal Elrod and John Berghoff.
The World Wildlife Fund, animals are people too.
Mike Block, realtor in Santa Cruz, California. Make your Santa Cruz dream happen. And some of those dreams are pretty wacky, aren't they?
Hey, what did I say the other day? There's a lot of Santa Cruz in Santa Cruz.
There's a lot of Santa Cruz in Santa Cruz. Our good friends at Interview Valet. If you want to drive your business, get your ass booked on some legendary podcasts.
Jamie Masters' top-rated podcast, Eventual Millionaire.
And the new book from our dear friend David Osborne, Wealth Can't Wait. Today's information is provided to you solely for informational purposes. This oddcast is the sole property of the Legends and Losers Oddcast Network, and we would love it if you shared the shit out of it.
Warning, this oddcast was produced in a studio that contains nuts.
Teach entrepreneurship, and remember, only fart in an elevator of 3 or more people.
Don't be lame. Get out of the passing lane.
Go ahead, eat some cake.
Reaccommodate your alternative facts.
Introduce 2 people you love to 2 podcasts you love.
And make sure Legends and Losers is on the list.
Hey, this oddcast really ties the room together. And our deepest apologies to United CEO Oscar Munoz. Sorry, Oscar. We ran out of time for you. Be legendary, our friends.